This week on the Four Rivers Ag Report, we find out the state of the Illinois farm. And is fracking all that it's cracked up to be? Also, Perry talks power. All that and more on the Four Rivers Ag Report. Welcome to the Four Rivers Ag Report. I'm Fred Peralta. Well, recently the Illinois Farm Bureau hosted the Illinois Agricultural Legislative Roundtable in Charleston. It was organized by the friend of the program, Adam Nielsen, and it was a good conference with a ton of good information. So we thought we'd take a bit of a departure from our normal format and spend our time this week talking to the people at the program who really had a lot to say, from politics to power. Or maybe we should say the power of politics and the politics of power. First up, Mark Gebhardt. He's the Executive Director of the Governmental Affairs for the Illinois Farm Bureau, and we talked about the importance of message. With me now is Mark Gebhardt. He's the Executive Director for Governmental Affairs for the Illinois Farm Bureau. And Mark, why is it important for farmers and producers and people interested in rural issues to pay attention to what's going on legislatively?
Well, really one of the things that impacts profitability, if you will, for our farmers and our landowners anymore is that legislative and regulatory environment that has become such a big issue. In some ways, with Illinois Farm Bureau, we try to make sure that obviously there's representation for our members in that arena, whether it be state, national, or local. And so the power of that, of us as an organization, is representation, advocacy, making sure again that the farmers' best interests are looked out for.
Now, I've noticed there's the Farm Bureau, there's the soybean folks, there's the corn folks, there's the transportation folks. The issues can get separated very quickly. Why is it important to have an umbrella group like the Farm Bureau or other ag groups coordinate these sorts of efforts?
Well, one of the things that we try to do at Illinois Farm Bureau is work as a facilitator in building coalitions with many of those groups that you mentioned, the specific commodities that represent whether it's our livestock commodities or our grain commodities, but also work with the agribusiness community, work with, again, entities of government that may be involved in infrastructure issues, as you mentioned, transportation, which is a very critical issue for us as far as farming, but as far as our rural, the rural landscape is concerned. So we do build a lot of coalitions. We work that way purposely because our strength, our numbers have declined in terms of the numbers of farmers that may be out there actually doing the work. But what we try to do, again, is bring together those coalitions and those groups to work together on the issues that we address.
Now, you've mentioned fewer farmers. There has been a call, Secretary Vilsack, you've mentioned it, about rural communities having to work harder to maintain their importance or their voice in the legislative process. What sort of activities can rural communities do to make it more effective, make sure their voice is heard in a very noisy legislative atmosphere?
Well, one of the things, again, that we try to do with our legislative representation or advocacy is work very closely with those urban legislators. For example, we have a program at Illinois Farm Bureau called Adopt a Legislator, and what we do is we get our downstate county farm bureaus to adopt one of those legislators out of the 5-county area around Chicago, which is where 74% of the General Assembly resides, is in that 5-county area. And we make sure they have an understanding of what our issues are, how we do what we do on the farm, whether that's livestock production, crop production, specialty crops. And we also bring in the component of the rural issues. For example, broadband access is one of the things that's a high priority for us, to make sure that rural people have access to broadband. So we try to make sure that we bridge that knowledge, that gap, if you will, that might occur between urban legislators and downstate folks.
How do you work at that bridge, especially since if you're not here, you don't think about the economic impact of our agriculture to the area, the special needs of those areas. I'm thinking about the recent age limit that they were talking about, the USD, the road folks, about the farm drivers.
Right.
how do you communicate those issues to the legislators who frankly are worried about getting elected on their own issues?
Well, what we try to do is get our members, who are, again, the folks that can best address what either economically it means to them on the farm when you talk about additional regulations, what it means to have good transportation, whether that's river, rail, roads, and bridges. Agriculture is the #1 industry in the state of Illinois, and I think that's really taken for granted in many ways, and many people don't realize that, but we are the economic engine for the state of Illinois, and there's so many things that rely on or, again, support agriculture, and we try to make sure that the legislators understand what that means. Another example is food processors in the Chicagoland area. Food is what we are. That's who we are, what we do. And we have one of the largest food processing sectors in the world in that Chicagoland area. So we've tried to make sure we bridge those folks with the legislators, again, making sure that they make that connection and understand what all this really means.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate your help.
My pleasure.
There's a Duke Ellington song that was old even before I was born, and it goes, "You don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing." Well, the swing in this case is making your voice heard in arenas of power that can actually bring about change. You know, we've talked about the federal government and the issues of dealing with agriculture, but what about on the state side? Springfield may be just down the road, but at times it seems like it's a million miles away. I talked to Bill Bodine about what's happening there and what you should do about it. With me now is Bill Bodine. He's the lobbyist for the Illinois Farm Bureau on the state side. And Bill, we talked to Adam a lot about what's happening on the national scene, but really there's a lot of stuff affecting our area in the state legislature that we don't hear about. What's some of the big ticket items that you're dealing with on a daily basis?
Well, obviously, as you look at the entire state of Illinois, everyone's aware of the fiscal situation that the state's facing. So when it comes to the fiscal situation, we watch that very closely because it does have an impact on all the businesses in Illinois, including our farmers. So we're looking at things like pension reform, the current budget situation that our state is facing. There have been a couple of issues recently that have surfaced. There was an issue associated with the farmland assessment law, where a change was sought by the Illinois Department of Revenue to make some adjustments to the farmland assessment law to maintain the integrity and fairness of that law. That particular change was included in a piece of legislation that did pass this General Assembly session and is now being considered by the governor.
Now, speaking of that, I was surprised with how little noise that change in assessment registered. I figured whenever you change assessment, there are winners and losers, and the losers were going to really complain. Now, I didn't hear any. Was it generally well accepted?
I think there was an understanding that we want to maintain the fairness and integrity of the farmland assessment law. That's the basis for that entire law. And the concern would be that if an adjustment wasn't made in how that process works, that could come into question. So there's an understanding out there that this change will bring that law back into alignment with the original intent of the farmland assessment process.
Good land is worth more than bad land.
Correct. And so by doing that, by making this change, it does bring that back into alignment. And so I think there was an understanding that by doing so, we can maintain the farmland assessment law going forward, which is what the ultimate goal was.
Okay. Now, you talk about the economic environment of the state of Illinois, and it doesn't look like revenue enhancement is going to go anywhere. So we're dealing with a fixed pile of money in a sluggish economy. How do we deal with the high cost issues of like transportation? Roads and bridges in rural communities are usually the last to be considered for repair, and they carry a lot of the heavy. If we lose a bridge over 57, farmers will have to go miles and miles and miles out of their way to deliver grain. How do we deal with people who are legislators who are trying to protect their own districts and their own interests?
Well, I think what we have to do is look at the big picture. And I go back to what we started with. We have to solve the state's bigger fiscal issues before we can get to some of these other items that we need to address. And so by dealing with some of the state's bigger issues, I know, there's been a lot of discussion about pension reform. There's a lot of discussion about the state's particular budget. We address those issues that will allow us some flexibility to do some other things when it comes to dealing with issues within districts, within infrastructure, those sort of items that may be helpful. Everything's interconnected, and so until we have the ability to solve some of our bigger financial problems, that will help us as we go forward in dealing dealing with all the issues that we face from a financial perspective.
What is your day like in trying to communicate these issues to the folks who can affect everybody's lives?
Well, it can be very busy. There are 177 total members of our General Assembly,
Right.
59 in the Senate, 118 in the House. We spend a lot of time, obviously trying to locate them and sit down and talk with them and help them understand agriculture. We do a lot of work outside of the General Assembly session to help our legislators who maybe don't have as much ag background or don't represent an agricultural district understand what agriculture is really about. We spend time having them come out and visit farms and talk with our farmers so that they can understand, when we do come in to talk to them about an agricultural issue, that they understand kind of the basics of how farming works, and then we can kind of explain how that issue might impact farming to them, and it helps. Not everyone has the opportunity to visit a farm all the time,
Right.
or talk with farmers,
Right.
and so we provide that opportunity as much as we possibly can.
Right.
And then obviously we strongly encourage our members to be involved, to talk with their legislators, to get involved in the process, so that they can make sure that they're communicating to their legislators how they feel about the issues, how it's going to impact their business, and what's going to be in the best interest of farmers.
All politics is local.
That's very true.
Okay,
All
well-
politics is local.
Well, Bill, thank you very much for being with us today.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Relatively early in the program, Tom Wolf of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce talked about the status of power generation, production, and transmission in the state. How does it affect us? In more ways than you think. Tom Wolf, the Executive Director of the Energy Council of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, is here. And Tom, you just gave a presentation about energy issues in Illinois, and a couple popped to mind that affect really our area a lot. First is fracking. What was in the bill that came through the General Assembly about fracking, and what is the truth and what are some of the myths?
Well, it was Senate Bill 1715 got passed by the legislature the last day of session, May 31st. We expect it to be signed by the governor soon. It is the most stringent regulatory model for hydraulic fracturing in the country.
What are some of those stringent features you're talking about?
So a couple examples. The oil and gas producers, the people who do the fracking operations, they have to do water testing before, during, and as they do the fracking operations. So they're the first ones to have that baseline, what's the groundwater look like. So if somebody comes later and says, oh, this is different, they have a baseline test to base it against, and to see if it's changing as they're doing the operation.
Right. So we're
to
dealing with
protect the
facts as
groundwater.
opposed to feelings.
Exactly. When the water comes back up and the product comes back up from the ground, they have a closed loop system. So some places in Pennsylvania and North Dakota, when the water comes up, they can actually store it in open pits, which is fine. It's
Right,
safe,
right.
and for a certain amount of days, and then ship it out. In Illinois, it always has to be an enclosed loop, so
Okay.
in tanks at all times. It never sees the light of day unless there's an emergency, and then even then they have like 10 days to get it out of their emergency pits. There's those kinds of environmental protections, well casing protections. So as I call it, the straw that goes down into 7,000 feet below has the casing it needs so it doesn't leak where the groundwater is.
Now, you're talking about an area of the state that was really hit hard by the drought, and water issues are very important around
Yep.
here. You talk about that straw casing that
Yep.
goes through the aquifers.
Yep.
What are the issues involved in that? Why is that straw casing, what's different about that straw casing, and how can we not be sure, but how can we be reasonably sure that it's not going to affect the groundwater and drinking water?
Well, there's two issues with that. One is as the product, the water, there's 99% water, some sand, and some chemicals that go and create the fracking at
Right.
4,000 to 7,000, 8,000 feet underground.
Right.
So there is residue that's left at that level. There's been no scientific study from anybody, including Lisa Jackson, was the former U.S. EPA director, of any migration from that level
Right.
up to the groundwater aquifers, which is 0 to 1,000 feet. So that might geologists say it's impossible, physicists say it's not possible. However, you do have that straw that gets you down there. If that does leak, that can be a problem. So they have the regulatory structure in place with specific language about depth and width and breadth and 4 times concrete and all these things that industry has proven that and environmental groups have seen that protects that area. So the straw needs to be hole free, I guess. It needs to be solid, and they make sure that it is. That's what regulations are for.
Right. Now, you were one of your slides said energy equals jobs.
Yeah.
you suggested that fracking could really change the economy of southeastern Illinois. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, they can. It's all up to the shale. At this point, we have the regulations in place.
So we have to
now.
depend on the darn shale.
It's up to them. Not every shale play in the United States is created equal. Millions of years ago, it was created. Who knows what's in there now? So, Western Pennsylvania, Western New York, or North Dakota, Southern Texas have had much success and economic development because of the hydraulic fracturing operations in those states. In Illinois, we did a study with Illinois State University to see what kind of jobs could come to Illinois if this happened. And we came with a range of 1,000 to 47,000 jobs over 5 years.
Wow.
Why is that a big range? Well, because if they don't find the product at the right price to get out of the ground economically, they're not going to stick around. And if they do find a product they like economically, it could be a nice little boom for southeastern Illinois.
Now, another topic, you talked a little bit about wind energy in Illinois, and you said Illinois is a major producer of wind energy. It's not so much of an issue down around us, but what are some of the issues involving farmers and wind generation? And are the equations changing?
Well, in energy, the equations always change. So we're the number 4 state for wind energy in the country.
Okay.
In 2003, there were no wind farms in Illinois. Now we're the number 4 in the country. That's a major change in 10 years. I've talked to folks who build the turbines, and they've gotten turbines that are 40% more efficient than they were 5 years ago, and yet cost the same as they did 5 years ago. So we have more efficient, we're getting more energy out of each mile per hour of wind, I guess. So that's changing. What also is, I guess, maturing is the relationship between the wind energy company and the farmer. They're making sure that they're not affecting as few crops as possible. They're not affecting nearby houses as much as possible, and they have agreements so when the wind turbine's done, they're taken down and they're taken care of. It's an ongoing relationship. It's a relatively new relationship because we didn't have these wind farms 10 years ago, but the Farm Bureau, along with the Chamber and other folks, are trying to look for that sweet spot where you can have that energy come, that the farmers get benefit from that. They do get money for per turbine every year, which they find helpful. And at the end of the day, they can still be effective in their number 1 job, which is growing our food.
Quite often, we tend to send resources to where there are lots and lots of people, and it's very cost efficient to send it there. Downstate, there are people who need energy resources, but they're spread out. What are some of the issues as far as transmission goes with energy policy in Illinois?
Transmission issues will never go away. They continue to get, it's always a conundrum when there's more transmission lines being built now to help solve that. One, to get more energy to the city populations that need it, but also make sure that's available to everybody in the state that needs it. Because there's still, there's I think 7 billion people in the world last time I checked. I think it might have changed. 1.2 billion people don't have access to electricity grid. So people in Illinois know intrinsically that if you don't have access to energy, you are in a much tougher spot. So that is an ongoing public policy issue that's going to be debated, and it should never stop. We should always make sure that people have access to a cost-competitive supply of energy, whether they're in downtown Chicago or they're in a farm in Washington County.
Now, lastly, you mentioned a surprising piece of research that you found when a company went in to work with a dairy farm. Tell me about that.
So, a lot of people are looking at efficiency, energy efficiency, which everyone watching this should think about. We can't build a nuclear plant ourselves. We probably can't build a wind farm on our own, but we can use energy more efficiently. So there's a company out there that's helping other companies decide what kind of lighting they should have in their home or business, so they save money on it. So this company was a consultant, and there was a dairy farm they were working with in Wisconsin, and they were changing the lights from fluorescent to LED lights in the milking operation, the milking house. And they were basing the return on investment for the dairy farmer based on the energy savings. Then they put the new lights in, and they found that the cows produce 5% more milk with the LED lights. And no one knows why, and the cows aren't telling you.
Well, it's probably more romantic.
Yes, maybe they dim them and have some, like, I don't know,
Bee
Gees. The Bee Gees, who knows? Showing my age there with the Bee Gees.
Well, I'm right with you.
But that's one of those ancillary stories that I love, because the energy world, so much changes, and once in a while you get a good story like that, you just have to share it.
So energy is is not just jobs, it's also confusing sometimes.
Hey,
isn't it?
well, there are challenges and opportunities with every kind of energy. There's no perfect energy out there, but we all need it. Live, work, and play in the society that we've created. You need access to energy. People know that when their lights go out. It used to be an inconvenience. Now you have nothing to do because your iTablets and your Wii's and whatever you're using. I mean, and for the farming industry, it's the same thing.
Right.
You realize so much in energy. And I always tell people, energy is no different than farming. If you look at a family farm in 1950 and how they operate versus now, it's night and day difference.
Right.
Energy is the same way.
Right.
I mean, we're finding better and better ways to use energy, to create it, to generate it, and transport it. So it's an exciting portfolio to be in.
And the final speaker of the day was a familiar face. Dr. William Perry of Eastern Illinois University spoke about the project right here that is not just on the cutting edge, it is the cutting edge of biomass energy production. He talks about the Renewable Energy Center and the lessons we've learned in just the short time it's been open. With me now is President William Perry of Eastern Illinois University and the champion of the Renewable Energy Center. And Dr. Perry, it's been a couple years since it's went online. What are the lessons we've learned from the Renewable Energy Center?
Well, we've learned that it works.
That's a good thing.
Yes, but we've also learned that it's complex. So it's a new technology in some ways. It's an existing technology in others. So fitting those together, at times has been a challenge, but we've got great people who've been working on that. So we've learned how to operate it, but more than that, we've learned that the Renewable Energy Center has been a catalyst for all sorts of activity on campus. In particular, over 50 faculty joined together as members of a Center for Clean Energy Research and Education. We sent a formal proposal to the Illinois Board of Higher Education for that. It was approved. We've broken ground for a building out just north of the Renewable Energy Center. There'll be a lab in there. There'll be workspace, space for the research scale gasifier, but there's also going to be some space as an idea incubator that people in the community will be able to use to test out new ideas with respect to energy. And all of that has created grant activity, activity with the local schools in terms of curriculum, and revitalized our bachelor's degree, master's degree, and minor in alternative energy.
Now, it's interesting how ideas come up. What is the oddest synergy that you've heard of coming out of that program?
Well, first of all, before the Renewable Energy Center existed, we had a lot of people on campus who were very involved in the environment, being environmentally responsible. So Eastern, we were the EPA Partner of the Year, College Partner of the Year a couple of times before I got here. So that spirit was already here. So when it came time to talk about replacing the old steam plant, that spirit was what motivated us to do something more than just solve a problem, but to create a vision.
Right.
A vision for the university and a vision for the faculty and staff. And that's what happened there. That's the kind of synergy that I think is important.
Now, you talked about the complexity of running the plant. What sort of issues have we run into?
Well, you've got multiple conveyor belts, and you've got material handling units. You have to have the moisture of the chips right. You have to feed the chips in at exactly the right speed, and so forth and so on. And if any of that doesn't work right, then it changes the environment in the gasifier. And so that process is all connected through software and programming, but we've seen that there are a couple of things missing there that we need to change. We need working with Honeywell to correct so the thing will work at its most efficient way.
We didn't know what we didn't know.
Well, yeah, that's true with any complex system. That's right.
Now, presently we're working with wood chips, correct? Have we dealt with any other biomass?
Not on the large scale. One of the purposes of the research scale gasifier, which we already have, is to test other kinds of biomass. So you test the thermal capacity, or how much energy you can get out of it per unit volume. But you also can figure out what kinds of chemical residues are left over, because every piece of biomass is grown somewhere. It pulls certain things out of the soil. So depending on the soil, depending on who's been there before, what they've applied to the field before, or what you apply to a field now. It's all going to change the chemical composition of the cells of the biomass. And so one of the things you have to worry about is what is left over, because when you go to a commercial scale with that kind of biomass, it's going to leave deposits that are going to have to be cleaned up. So we're still doing a research scale at this point, but we can do, and we'll be able to do even more with our new building, the Center for Clean Energy Research and Education building, to do more and more research scale samples, so that when the time comes and we want to test at a commercial scale, we'll know a lot about it before we do that in the Renewable Energy Center.
Well, it's been an exciting 2 years for the Energy Resource Center, and
It has.
hopefully it's going to be many more years to come.
It will continue to be, that's
Okay.
right.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Rachel Tolbert and the folks at the Illinois Farm Bureau for putting up with some scruffy-looking people in the lobby. So that's it for this week. Work hard, be safe, and enjoy the beautiful sunsets. I'm Fred Peralta, and thanks for watching the Four Rivers Ag Report.